Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 36th webinar in this series since we started back in September 2020. I'm Sarah Bulloch and I work at the CAQDAS Networking Project along with Christina, which is based in the Department of Sociology at the University of Surrey. Our webinar today is in our pedagogy stream, where we focus on the teaching of qualitative methods and digital tools in face-to-face, online, and in blended contexts, discussing the challenges involved and innovative solutions. And the session today is presented by our very own Dr. Christina Silver, who I will introduce to you shortly. Christina Silver is the manager of the CAQDAS Networking Project, where she first started teaching back in 1998. And since then, she's worked both through the CAQDAS Networking Project and as a co-founder and director of qualitative data analysis services. She's trained thousands of researchers all over the world in a wide range of computer-assisted qualitative data analysis CAQDAS-packages. Christina has long been interested in pedagogy, and she has co-authored 4 books on digital tools and qualitative data analysis. And among these are a series that present what she and her co-author, Nick Wolf, call the 5-level QDA method, pedagogy for learning digital tools. And as part of her work on pedagogy, Christina has a long-standing interest in how we might integrate the use of digital tools in our everyday teaching of qualitative data analysis. And that's what Christina is going to talk to us about today. I'm really looking forward to this. If you have questions along the way and comments along the way, please use the chat function. I'll collate those questions and then I will put them to Christina at the end of the session. Okay, everyone enjoy. Christina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Let's just see if I can get the technology to work. Hopefully you can see my very brightly coloured first slide, like a bit of colour on a Thursday afternoon. Thank you very much for that introduction. Sarah and I work very closely together and she has lots to contribute to the thinking around these topics as well. You can see all my contact details there. Recently, I was asked to collate all the places that you can connect with me online and was quite staggered by the different places that I can be found. You may use some of those social media outlets. If you do, then it would be great to connect if you would like to. And you've also got my contact details there. Should you want to continue talking about these topics after the webinar today, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Okay, let's get going then, thinking about the teaching and learning of qualitative methods and tools, and specifically integrating approaches. First of all, I just want to say a little bit about the particular focus. So qualitative methods encompass a range of things, but my focus very much today is on the analytic methods. So I'm not going to be thinking so much about data collection methods, but specifically analytic methods, the methods that we use to annotate the qualitative and mixed materials that we might be working with in our projects. So I'm speaking to methods like thematic analysis, content analysis, grounded theory, discourse analysis. I'm sure you're all aware that there are many, many, many different approaches to analysing qualitative materials. And that's really what I'm focusing on when I'm talking about qualitative methods in this session today. But what do we mean by tools? Okay, so there are also a range of different tools and we can use manual tools. So many of us, I'm sure, learnt how to do qualitative methods using manual tools, highlighters, post-it notes, whiteboards, scissors, all kinds of things like that. We also have different types of digital tools. There are many researchers who use what I would refer to as general purpose digital tools. So Microsoft Word, Excel, and other tools like that that aren't specifically designed to facilitate qualitative data analysis, but can be used for it and have long been used for it. So those are general purpose tools. But my focus again today is on dedicated tools designed specifically for the purpose. And again, there are many of those. Atlas TI, Deduce, MaxQDA, Envivo, QDA Minor, Quirkos, Transana, many of them. And if you're interested in having discussions about the differences between those tools, then that's quite a lot of the work that Sarah and I do at the CAQDAS Networking Project. And there are also webinars that we've hosted around making comparisons and making informed choices between those tools. But really what I'm focusing on today, therefore, is the use of those dedicated tools to enact specific analytic methods. Okay, so that's the primary focus and how we can integrate the teaching and learning of those. Before I go any further, I'd like to facilitate a bit of a discussion about this topic later on. So to that end, I would like to put into the chat, both of us have put a link to a Google form in the chat. If you are able to please click on that link, there are 2 or 3 questions in there, just so that we can get a sense of a little bit of your background, and I will then share the results of that in a moment. Okay, so I want to make a couple of points about doing qualitative analysis manually. Okay, there's not necessarily anything wrong with doing this. Okay, and many of us, as I mentioned before, learnt and still do qualitative data analysis manually, and that may look something like this. In fact, many of you will be aware of the work of Brown and Clark, who talk about thematic analysis, and they've recently published a very popular textbook on reflexive thematic analysis. And they famously don't use dedicated tools, they work manually. And this image that I'm showing here on the slide comes from a YouTube lecture by Victoria Clark about thematic analysis. And I also did my first thematic analysis using manual methods. And this image here is from my undergraduate dissertation in 1994, I think it was, when I physically cut up bits of my transcripts and stuck them all over the place. So that's what can happen if we work manually. And many very high quality analyses are done in that way. There's also the ability, of course, of doing qualitative analysis using general purpose tools. And there is an article from 2016 on this topic where they talk about sorting using Excel, coding using numbers in Excel, and then moving all of that out into Word, and then using various style sheets, etc., in order to manage and sort those materials. But for me, although good quality analysis can be done in those ways, and of course has been done for a long time in those ways, there is a missing link when we work in manual ways or using general purpose software. And for me, that missing link is the interconnectivity. Okay, so when you're working entirely manually, if you're cutting bits of transcripts up like I did, you're losing where they came from, where those extracts came from the source materials. But also you're losing the connectivity between, the interconnectivity between the codes, the concepts, the themes that you're using to conceptualize your data, and the patterns and relationships that you're seeing between them, because everything is disconnected. And for me, that's really the key reason that I would choose to use a dedicated tool for my qualitative analysis, because I believe, as I've written in one of my blog posts, that the main benefit is the access that interconnectivity provides us as researchers in 4 key ways: to the materials that we're working with, the qualitative materials, to the ideas that we have that form the basis of our analysis, to the processes that we undertake as we go through a rigorous analysis, which is really important if we need to write up our methods, and also access for others, being able to share our work in order to build on it, be able to collaborate with people. So that is, those are 4 key aspects of interconnectivity. So I just wanted to start with that. So I'm just going to pop back to see whether, here we go, fabulous. All right, so most of you here today, just around half, are researchers using qualitative methods and tools. There are a few students. There are also some teachers, that's excellent. And also some who have dual roles, so that's great. Most of you are using qualitative tools at the moment, either teaching, learning, or using them. And what kind of tools do you use typically? So 40% are using dedicated tools. Some of you are using manual. Okay, there's a really big spread there of different tools, which is very interesting to see. Because that also aligns with my experience, which is that I combine tools. Okay, so although I've been advocating for and working in the field of CAQDAS packages, dedicated CAQDAS packages for a long, long time, I'm also a fan of the highlighter pen. I've got highlighter pens always on my desk, and as you can see, I use multiple tools. I combine tools, okay, and that's another aspect of integration that I think is really important. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a lead-in to the main topic that I'd like to discuss today, which is the integration of teaching and learning qualitative methods and tools, okay? And I want to make a few comments about what I see to be a continued lack of integration of the teaching and learning of qualitative methods and tools. So first of all, I'll make a couple of points about how we know that to be true. So as Sarah mentioned before, I've been working with the CAQDAS Networking Project for almost 30 years now, and we are still seeing hundreds of students every year at our events who come to us to be trained in the use of qualitative software because they haven't got the ability to do that in their host institution. We see that in the UK and we see that around the world. And we also run qualitative methods and software sessions at many other academic institutions as well as our own, where we are invited to come and teach. And so therefore we have a sense that there is a lack of integrated teaching around the way. And since COVID, we've been doing much more teaching online, of course, and so we're seeing that that's a commonality across the world, not just within the UK context where we primarily work. Okay, so the assertion would be that if there was lots of integrated, if it was common that students were learning about qualitative methods and tools, then they wouldn't be needing to tap into all of the sessions that we are providing. Okay. We've also, myself and colleagues have also, informing our own work, done research into learning about these technologies and how they are adopted. And through that research, we've also seen that there's a lack of teaching and learning of both methods and tools. The next thing, of course, is not just that it's not happening consistently, but also, okay, well, so what? Why does it matter? Okay, for me, it matters because we are now living in an increasingly digital world, okay, and almost certainly there will be contexts and needs for being able to be analysing data using digital tools beyond the university learning that students are receiving. So I believe that we have a responsibility to the next generation of qualitative researchers to teach them not only about the methods, but also about the tools that we have. And that includes the digital tools. So I'm not saying that we should only be teaching them about digital tools, but we should be teaching them about the range of tools that are available there. And this is not something that only myself and my close colleagues are discussing. but there are many other teachers of qualitative software programs. There are many discussions that have been had over the years. And this textbook, I think, is a really excellent example of how that responsibility and that need to integrate methods and tools goes far beyond the specific analysis, but also the whole qualitative research process. So Paulus and Lester's textbook about doing qualitative research in a digital world is about expanding that out to the broader research cycle in its entirety. So I believe basically that we are doing students a disservice by not integrating the teaching. Having said that, of course, there are some examples of integration. So there are people who are doing this. And this is a list. I'm not expecting you to read this list, but this list is a list of examples from around the world of integrated teaching and learning. This is not an extensive list, but just to give you a sense of the examples that are out there. It's just that it's not embedded in the culture of how we teach qualitative methods at the moment. So, as Sarah said, I've been thinking about these topics for a long time. And a few years ago, I wrote a blog post about this in the context of how we might go about teaching qualitative coding. And that's really where this presentation and the publication that comes out of it kind of stemmed from when I was reflecting on what I call the whether, when, and how debate. So the whether is really to do with whether it is appropriate to integrate methods and tools, teaching and learning. And there are, of course, academics, teachers who believe the answer to that question is no. And there are lots of examples, lots of models of teaching qualitative methods that either completely ignore tools or sideline the tools in some way. I'm not going to discuss those models today. I'm going to discuss the models that do integrate in some way. Okay, so that brings us on to the when of the debate. If we are going to integrate the teaching and learning of methods and tools, we have to think about when we do that. And that's to do with the sequencing of the integration. And that's something that can happen in a variety of ways, as I'll discuss shortly. The how is to do with the mode of that teaching and learning, the resources that we have available, and how we draw on them, and the pedagogies and the instructional designs that we use to do the teaching and learning in an integrated way. So those are key things to reflect upon. So basically, I can see that there are three core designs for integrating the teaching and learning of qualitative methods and tools. First of all, we've got the methods first model. And that basically is successive teaching of methods and tools. So methods are typically taught first, followed by how those methods can be operationalized within one or more digital tools. The amount of time that's spent on each aspect varies quite significantly, but typically the learning of the tool builds on the learning of the methods, which is why we refer to that as the methods first model. So that's one model that can be adopted. Then we've got the model which we call the interwoven model. So we're partially integrating the teaching of methods and tools in the sense that we would teach an analytic method, let's say coding as an example, and then we would teach that outside of the tool context, and then we would teach it in a digital tool. And then we'd go back and teach another aspect of a method, and then how that can be done in the tool. So we're interweaving the qualitative methods with the digital tool. So it's like a back and forth switching between methods and tools. So that's another model. And then we have the methods via model, okay? When the two are fully integrated in the sense that the methods are taught via the tool, okay? So that's what we would call a fully integrated approach. and we're not teaching one and then the other in any way, but we're teaching the methods through the use of the tool. So the tool is the mechanism by which the method is taught. I mentioned earlier a publication, and so stemming out of that blog post that I wrote a while ago, myself and three of my colleagues, Sarah, who's here today, Michelle Salmona, who isn't here because she's in Australia, so it's the middle of the night for her, and Nicholas Wolf, it's also very early in the morning where he is in the world. But the four of us got together and talked about this, and we have written a chapter in the forthcoming handbook here of teaching and learning social research methods, which builds on this idea of integration. It's not going to be available until September, but I will share with you some of the key aspects of that today. And I want to just let you know that in that publication, in that handbook chapter, we have got examples from a range of different methods and tools and models. So we have got an example from Kathy Gibbons of the methods first model of integration using QAQDAS. We have got an example of the methods interwoven model from Steve Wright in Lancaster around the use of 3 different tools and also multiple different analytic methods. We've got 2 examples about using the methods via model, one from Michelle, which is using Deduce to teach coding, and the other one from Karen Andes, which is an online curriculum-based module using MaxQDA. And then we've also got 2 examples of adapting those 3 models or combining those models within one teaching encounter. And there are 2 examples, one from Christian Schneider and his colleagues, data jams using MaxQDA, and the other one is a master's level course on NVivo that Sarah and myself have taught. So there are some practical examples there to draw upon if you're in this situation that you wanted to develop your own integrated model. And I'll come back to those different models later on. The chapter actually also discusses various other things about these examples, including their underlying pedagogic principles, the type of learning encounter, so the length, the type, whether it's open registration or part of a university course, for example, the structure of the teaching and learning. So that includes the kind of modular aspect of it, or how it's structured in terms of learning modules or units, and also the tools that are used for teaching and learning. So demonstrations, guided instructions, group and individual work, supplementary learning materials, etc. So there's a range of different ways in which these examples are discussed. And in the textbook, in the chapter, you can read the detail about that when it comes out. But as I say, I'll come back to the models later on. Okay, so I'm kind of making the argument that we have a responsibility as teachers to teach methods and tools in integrated ways, and that there are different ways that can happen. Okay, but that's not to say that there aren't challenges. There definitely are challenges with integrating the teaching and learning of qualitative methods and tools. And I want to make a few reflections on those challenges in 3 respects: mindset, practicalities, and the connection of methods and tools. Okay, how did you learn? Or how do you teach qualitative methods? Okay, so 40% methods first, then digital tools. Around 20% methods interwoven. 28%, so a third of you methods only, no teaching and learning of tools. And then a few people have given some other examples. Undergraduate methods only, postgraduate methods first, then digital tools. That's very common, I hear that. And then this one here. Okay. All right, that's interesting. So actually, quite a lot of us here today have had some form of integrated teaching and learning. I suppose that stands to reason because you're here in a webinar about the topic. But even so, quite a lot didn't have that at all. So that's interesting. Thank you for that. Okay, let's go back to the challenges, and I want to say something about mindsets. Okay, so challenges of integration. I think it's important to reflect on why it is that integration doesn't always happen. Okay, and I think there's a historical precedent for that, and that's partly because we have had methods long before we had digital tools, right? So digital tools, although they've been around for around 30 years now, dedicated digital tools for qualitative analysis, the history of qualitative methods is much, much longer than that, okay? So many teachers of qualitative data analysis methods weren't taught digital tools themselves, and they may not have the skills or the inclination to integrate discussion of tools with their methods. Okay, their main focus or interest may be on the methods, and that's, you know, fair enough, isn't it? Not everybody wants to or has the capacity to do that. But I do believe, in the context that we're now in, that it's also important to reflect on what's happened historically in this field over the last 30 years. And actually, the adoption of these dedicated digital tools has been gradual in some contexts and partial, okay? There certainly was skepticism from established qualitative researchers when these tools first became available. And an article that Christy Jackson and colleagues wrote in 2018 illustrates that much of that skepticism persists in various contexts. And I think it's important that we reflect on those contexts about the role of digital tools in qualitative methods, and what's happening at the moment with all of the discussion about AI and ChatGPT, etc., means that these topics are particularly relevant to reflect on at the moment. But this quote here from Paulus et al. From a few years ago is something that I think is really important and brings this idea of mindsets to life. And they say, if senior scholars and graduate faculty are not using the tools in informed ways themselves, then it makes it less likely that the next generation will either. And my contention, really, my personal belief, is that that's not good enough. Just because I might not want to use the tools doesn't mean that I shouldn't be telling the next generation, my students, about those tools. I think that we have responsibilities and we should be doing that, even if we're not using them ourselves. So that's something to reflect on in terms of mindsets. What about practicalities? So even if there is a desire and an ability to integrate the teaching and learning of methods and tools, that might not always happen, and there are various reasons for that. Practical reasons, time and resource constraints. Often the teachers of qualitative methods have a limited amount of space in the curriculum to teach methods, let alone tools as well. So there's some constraints there. And that might be why actually thinking about integrating, especially the methods via model, might be particularly useful. But then there's also the technological infrastructure. If you're teaching in person, then you need to have computer labs, you need to have the software available and working and accessible to the students, and that there's no point in teaching students digital tools if they can't then go and use them without paying for licenses themselves. So license availability is really important as well. So those are particular practical considerations. If we're teaching in the online context, then there are potentially some added pressures as well. So intermediary technologies that you need to use. So not only do you need the software that you're teaching, the CAQDAS package that you're teaching, you also need the video conferencing platform, Zoom and Teams, and Sarah will agree with me, I'm sure, that often causes some issues. Multiple monitors so that the learners can see what the teacher is demonstrating as well as what they're doing on their own screen. So there's lots of intermediary technologies that are needed. We can no longer walk the room. So when you're teaching in person, you can walk the room and see what everybody's doing on their computers, and that's quite useful. And that's not possible in the same way online, of course. And then something that Sarah and myself and Michelle wrote about in a blog post during COVID was the idea that when you're teaching online, the fact that there's all kinds of other things going on in the learners' lives and in the rooms means that the real life bleeds into the classroom in a way that doesn't happen in in-person contexts so much. So there are certainly some practical challenges of integration in those contexts, which are important to consider. And then there is the aspect of what I call connecting, okay? So for me, the harnessing of these digital tools for analytic purposes powerfully involves ensuring that our methods are driving the way that we use tools. And Sarah mentioned the 5-level QDA method that myself and Nick developed a few years ago. And we've got 3 textbooks around that. And really that whole idea of methods driving tools is what we talk about in those particular textbooks. But the important point in terms of our discussion today really is that it's possible to have a separate understanding of methods and tools. So to understand qualitative methods and to understand how digital tools work without them being connected. And for me, it's the integration of the teaching and learning that's really important, because if you teach them completely separate, then that connection between the two doesn't happen in a way that makes it easy for learners and users of qualitative software to use the tools in what we would call a powerful way. So without bothering about all of the detail of 5-level QDA today, that distinction between strategies and tactics and how strategies drive tactics is the core principle of the 5-level QDA method. And so that's to do with the strategies or the analytic methods as we're specifically thinking about them today. It's to do with what's planned in our analysis, yes? Whereas the tactics, the tools that we use, are to do with how those strategies can be enacted, okay? So basically, the textbooks kind of unpack what we call a process of translation between the methods and the tools, ensuring that the methods are driving the tools, the strategies are driving the tactics, is the language that we use. Although tools, the availability of tools can inform our methods, but essentially we want our methods to be driving our tools. So in the chapter, we use that frame to think about those 3 models that I mentioned earlier. So I'm just going to come back to those 3 models and make a few comments about them, and then hopefully have plenty of time to open up for discussion, because I'd really like to hear your thoughts on these topics and your experiences. So methods first models, okay, this is all to do with the understanding of strategies. Methods are later brought to bear on the learning around tactics. So we start off with methods, but then the connection happens by then when we look at the tools, we look at the tools in relation to the methods that we've learned already, okay? And that happens in the methods first way. So therefore, this idea of translation that I've just discussed happens implicitly in that kind of model, okay? And the benefits of this, many of you have experienced this kind of teaching and learning. The benefits of this is that the teaching and learning is coordinated, okay? So the learning of tools is methods focused, because the tools learning is building on the methods learning. So it's not that entire separation. But we'll talk a little bit about what some of the challenges might be later. Then we've got methods interwoven models. And if you're doing that oscillation between methods and tools in the way that you incrementally teach and learn, then the translation is embedded in explicitly, because you're teaching a method and then you're showing how that method can happen in the tool, and then you teach another aspect of the method and then you show how that can be taught in the tool. So in that sense, the translation is much more explicit. So essentially what you're doing is you're saying as a teacher, okay, if we want to accomplish this, then we could use this or this software tool. So you're illustrating in that way the flexibility of the software in the moment that you are teaching the method. Okay, so the connection is closer in that kind of methods interwoven model. But that will bring with it some additional challenges. And then finally, the methods via model. Okay, so the teaching and learning is not only from the strategies to the tactics, or from the methods to the tools, but can swing backwards and forwards. Okay, so in this way, the sense in which strategies drive tactics or methods drive tools is not quite so clear cut as it would be in the other two examples, in the sense that because you're teaching methods through the use of tools, the relationship between the two is much closer, okay? And therefore, you're explicitly inviting the learner to think about how the tool can impact on the method. So the oscillation is much tighter, and that has a number of challenges and benefits. One of the benefits, I think, is that it can really lead to very creative use of tools. This is the space where really we can start to really develop new methods through our creative use of tools, because we can really mix methods. So it's not that way, okay, this is the method and this is how we do it, but it's much more about, okay, these are all kind of happening in relation to one another. And that can stretch the way that we think about the software. Okay, so let me just do that. I want to open up the discussion now. We've got a bunch of time left, but a few things we could talk about. And I would love to hear any questions or comments that you have. Obviously, my contention, well, maybe it's not obvious, but my contention is there are challenges, but those challenges are insurmountable, and that we should be doing it, even though the challenges are there. But I do want to think about the extent to which and how the benefits of integrated teaching and learning can outweigh those challenges, why it's important. Okay, but also what are some of the considerations in planning to integrate methods and tools teaching and learning? So if you're in the situation when you're a methods teacher and you want to integrate tools teaching as well, what are some of the things to think about? And so I've just created a small little table here which talks about those three models, and of course they can be adapted and combined as well. But these are some things to think about that you may want to use as a framework. So in terms of who does the teaching, okay, if you're intending a methods interwoven or a methods via model, then the teacher needs to have expertise in both methods and tools, in all of the methods that you're teaching and all of the tools that you're teaching. If you're doing the methods first module, then it could be that you have separate teachers teaching the methods from the tools bit, yeah? But in that situation, you would need explicit dovetailing in order to make those connections, because when there are separate teachers doing the methods and tools teaching, and there's no communication, no dovetailing, that's when you have the unintegrated, the separated, the siloed understanding of the two things. And we need the connection to make it powerful. In terms of when the teaching is done, there's different things to consider. I would suggest that in the methods first module, you shouldn't have too much time between the methods learning and the tools learning. Otherwise, the connections won't be so effective. In the other two, you need to have enough time within each session, if you like, to build up the two elements together. So the time is a sort of over time consideration rather than a point in time consideration. And then how is the teaching done? Okay, so for the methods first model, consider the extent to which the methods teaching signposts the tools teaching. So how can you make those connections explicit? In the methods interwoven model, managing the oscillation between the methods and the tools teaching is a skillful thing to do, and requires quite a lot of planning. So that's something that's an additional layer of instructional design, probably. And the methods via model, it's useful to consider whether a digital tool that has a multi-user version is an option for that, whereby the learners can all see what each other are doing. That can be a very effective way of teaching in that way, especially in an online teaching context. But that's an additional thing to think about. So that's basically all I really wanted to say. And I would love to see if there are any questions or comments in the chat and have a conversation about it all.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Christina. I really enjoyed seeing the paper presented in this way. You can hear me okay, yeah?
Yeah.
I had some faffing with my earphones and things, so good that these work. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. We had a couple of questions, one reflection, one question, really, and then we can open up the discussion a little bit more broadly. One reflection by Lawrence quite early on in your talk was around the kind of power. You were talking about how using the tools can be beneficial and integrating the tools can be beneficial. And Lawrence was reflecting on the role that these tools have to play in relation to replicability of what we're doing. And I was wondering whether you wanted to add anything onto that.
Yeah, really interesting thing. So as soon as you say the word I can't even say that word. Then that brings up the idea of paradigms. Yeah. Okay, and so for me, qualitative research and qualitative data analysis is a really broad area, and researchers and scholars are doing all kinds of different things within that broad umbrella term. And the idea of replicability of qualitative data analysis sits in a particular space in that spectrum. I like to think about a spectrum of methods in that context. And certainly if you're in that space and you need your analysis to be rigorous in the sense that it's replicable, then the use of digital tools definitely facilitates that, because you're able to generate an audit trail that can be replicated by somebody else. So I could do an analysis and I could capture how I'd done that in my digital tool and then pass that over to you, Sarah, or to Lawrence, who would then be able to follow my procedure and hopefully come up with the same results. But that's not relevant to all qualitative methods, right? And not all qualitative researchers would want or assume that would be something that's even possible. But if you are in that space, then yes, definitely, that's one of the reasons why using a tool like this would be useful.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. We also had a reflection from Ludmilla, or a question, and it's you touched briefly on the kind of rising conversations around AI. And Ludmilla was asking, she was saying that she's recently asked ChatGPT to make a thematic analysis, to undertake a thematic analysis for her for a short piece of text. And says that it actually did a really good job. It was obviously an inductive piece. And so Ludmilla was asking, do you think it can be seen as a strong competitor for other QA programs, other CAQDAS packages? And would you recommend it?
Okay, really interesting. I think this is the big topic of the moment, isn't it? A couple of things I'd like to say about that before I actually answer the question. One is that the idea of AI and machine learning has been available in CAQDAS packages for quite a long time. So, for example, we were discussing QDA Minor and WordStat earlier before we started the seminar. That has topic modeling in it, as do other tools. A qualitative software program online application called Discover Text has got machine learning embedded in it, and that software is all completely coming from the space that humans and machines learn best together. So the machine can learn from the human coding, so that humans would do some coding and adjudicate coding done by multiple researchers, and then the machine learns from that. So it's an iterative process, and that's about making the best. Those sorts of examples are about making the best of both the human interpretive power and the power of the software. And that's not something that's particularly new. So Discover Texas has that available for at least a decade. So that's worth just saying that this idea is not a new idea, even though everyone's suddenly on the bandwagon about it. The specific question, I do think that the new and different tools which are going to come on the horizon from now on will change the way that we think and do certain types of qualitative analysis, but not all types of qualitative analysis. And I think that speaks to what I said earlier about this spectrum. So, you can't say that all qualitative research is the same. It's not. There's lots and lots of different types of qualitative research, and for certain types of qualitative research, this will have a big impact. But for other types of qualitative research, it won't. I haven't actually tried getting ChatGPT, whatever it's called, to code up any qualitative data myself yet. I haven't got round to it, but what you'll hear from the purists will be that it can't interpret the meaning. It might be able to look at the text and tell you what's in the text, but that's very different from interpreting the meaning. And there's some really interesting dialogues going on at the moment about how babies and children learn to interpret, and how these AI technologies have got a long way to go to replicate that human brain interpretive process. But I definitely think it will change things in some situations.
Yeah. For me, there was also a piece that you mentioned earlier on around interconnectivity that these software tools are bringing to the table that we might be missing in other approaches to the analyses, or other tool sets, if you like. And I would find it difficult to envisage how something like these AI tools can keep that connectivity. So if you think about what the output is of an analysis, it's not just a list of coded data. There's more to it than that. So one way in which there's more is your interpretation, as you pointed out, but the other thing is also to do with making clear connections between materials, which is unlikely to be an output that they can provide. Anyway, thank you so much for that. So we have two other questions that have come up. Thank you so much for engaging in the chat. This is great. We have a question to do with how can we know which of your models, so the integration models, which model to use? And how can we choose which tool to learn? Or is it that we should learn all these digital tools? And do the manual and digital ways of analyzing bring the same results? So there's several questions there. So let's start with, how do you know which model of integration to use if we're teaching? Okay. And how do we know which tool to choose?
Okay, so how do we know which model to use, first of all? I think that's an instructional design question. So you need to think about what, if I was a teacher wanting to embark on an integrated model, then I would first think about, okay, what is it that I'm trying to teach my students? And that would be the driving force for thinking about which of these integrated models would be most appropriate. And then I would think about the practical constraints. How much time have I got in the curriculum? What else are they learning in other modules that I want to connect up to? So there's lots of things like that. So I hope it came across in my talk that I'm not saying that one is better or worse than the others, but that any of these will do a really good job. And those examples that we've got in our chapter illustrate that, I think. So then it would be about what so part of what it is you want to teach has to do with whether you're teaching one method or multiple methods, right? So do I want to, as a simple example, do I want to teach how to do discourse analysis and how to do thematic analysis? If I wanted to teach two methods, then I would maybe think about, okay, do I want to do that in one tool and say, okay, I would use this tool differently if I was doing thematic analysis than discourse analysis, or do I want to choose two tools which are specifically designed or have particular things with them which are, so these are all the sorts of decisions that you need to make. If you're teaching more than one qualitative tool, then that's a much bigger load on the teacher, but also on the learner. So, you know, it might be that within one learning encounter, that's quite a challenging thing to do, and you would have to think about the extent to which that is going to be beneficial. So I think it's useful, personally, I think it's useful to know about lots of tools, because knowing about one tool, what's possibly in one tool, does change the way I might think about the tool that I'm using, and I think that's a good thing. But realistically, you know, at the moment, many learners are not being taught any tools, so I think one tool would be a great starting point, if it's you know, coming from the get-go, as it were.
Yeah, and then there's the billion-dollar question, Christina, which we often get, which is which one shall I learn? Asks.
Which tool?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a difficult. If we knew the answer to that question, Sarah, it's difficult, isn't it? So if you're in a university context, some universities have site licenses for some tools, and that's often the reason why certain tools get taught in universities. There are now more universities who have licenses for more tools. I'm definitely seeing that. And therefore, so the example from Steve Wright at Lancaster, that's a university-based module, and he's teaching 3 tools. So he's teaching 3 tools and multiple methods, at least 3 methods, I think. So that's an example. So his work would be a great example to go to if you wanted to do that. But you need to be a little bit realistic. There's no best software program. There's no best CAQDAS package. If you're a teacher and you're in the position when you can choose which tool to teach, then I would suggest that you teach that you choose the tool in relation to the method that you want to teach, so that you have to make that connection.
Okay, which touches really nicely on the next question, which is to do with if different qualitative tools kind of embody different mindsets and methods. So if some of them are kind of more designed from one perspective than another perspective, how can we make a judgment of which tool would be best to fit our method? And is there a better way than through trial and error?
Well, trial and error is not a bad thing to do. I think to some degree, we've all got to go through some trial and error to learn it. Having the scaffolding around that trial and error from some kind of teaching encounter is normally useful, whether that's self-learning through some of these texts that are available or through a workshop or something. If you took that spectrum from purist qualitative approaches to qualitative data analysis to the more quantitative approaches to qualitative data analysis, okay, where that whole idea of that word I can't say, replicability comes from, okay, so the sort of interpretivist to the positivist type of paradigm. Most of the software programs we're talking about that fall into this general CAQDAS umbrella, most of them sit sort of in the middle of that, right? So most of them are designed to undertake qualitative approaches to qualitative data. Some of them additionally facilitate mixed and quantitative approaches to qualitative data really well and come from that space. And some of them are particularly good at the in-depth qualitative interpretive approaches. But they all straddle that middle bit pretty well, I would say. So if you're wanting to teach a method that sits on the sort of purist qualitative end to the mixed methods end, then most of them will be really well appropriate for that type of thing. If you want some machine learning or some more quantitative content analysis, text mining, that kind of stuff, then not all of them do that. Some of them do. So then you would look to the ones that do that.
Great. So I just placed in the chat then, Christina, because I thought it would be helpful for people, the link to our software reviews on our website. So they provide some information about what many of the software packages do at the moment.
Yeah, there's also that webinar that we did a while ago. It was a while ago, but we did a webinar on choosing, didn't we? Making informed choices between CAQDAS packages. When I send the link out for this recording next week sometime, I'll put the link to that webinar in as well, because that might be useful for people to have a look at too.
Great. So there's one final question. So you've said, given some steer about, okay, well, most projects could be done in any of the packages, although there are some niche tools that we might want to be available. Final closing question: are there any methodologies that you think digital tools do not work well with? So, for example, if I'm completing a conversation analysis, I might use digital tools to collect the data of some form, but how might a CAQDAS package help?
Okay, interesting. So in my experience, not very many conversation analysts use this genre of software.
Yeah.
But I don't think that means it couldn't be used. It's just that it's not. And I think that that's partly to do with terminology and spaces from which these sorts of tools came from originally, and kind of understandings of qualitative data analysis. Maybe I did a session recently with had some linguists in there, and they're particularly interested in capturing grammatical characteristics, and this genre of software is not so good for that. So there are other tools out there that are designed for that kind of analysis.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's why the idea of combining tools is really important, right? You don't need to be wedded to one. You can combine them.
Cut across them. Well, thank you so much. There are a few questions that were asked that we haven't had an opportunity to answer, although Christina has answered the majority of them. Where there are those questions that are outstanding, we will see whether Christina will treat us to a little answer in an email after the webinar. You're going to get a recording of the session today. And thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have so many people here. Looking forward to seeing you at one of our next webinars, and wishing you a lovely rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. Keep well, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye now all.